Hi everyone, welcome. What you saw right there was the last frame, I believe, that we're going to take of my little special mission that's been going on here for the past 45 days. We gave this worm bin a cantaloupe, and there's been a time lapse getting filmed here for the past 6+ weeks. And regrettably, when I came down here today, I noticed that some of the lights that were illuminating the scene had blown out, leaving only a small portion of what was previously illuminating the scene. And I don't know, I'm not sure what the quality of the image is going to be at this point if we just continue, but it also does seem to me like the worms have done quite a job on this cantaloupe melon. So I think the time has come. Time has come to end the special mission here, so let's cast a little bit of extra light on the scene here. I could see my reflection there in the wall. Not reflection, shadow. So here we go. I've usually got the remote app here controlling the camera, and that's it. That's the official end of this newest time lapse. And you know, after 45 days of service, I bet these worms are probably thirsty and hungry. So today we're going to reunite this bin with its sort of sister bin, with its buddy bin, the one that it was teamed up with once upon a time, but they were separated when the worms in this container, the so-called original worms, I don't know if it's visible here in the darkness, but these original worms are the only worms I believe I can track back to my original population of worms. So we're going to get these guys up on the bench and get them fed. And even though the other bin, the buddy bin that this one's associated with and paired up with, was fed only 6 days ago, we're going to give them a little bit of food too, just to get them back in sync with one another. So that's it for this. Let's head over to the wormery with these guys and give them some food. Well, since this is kind of a welcome home party, we're pulling out all the stops and we're going really generous on the food. And like I said, the sister bin, or the twin bin, or the buddy bin of this one was fed only 6 days ago. So I don't think it needs a whole lot of food. So a good part of what we're allocating here today in this portion is going to go to these guys here. A whole bunch of pumpkins, some moldy bread, and some cuttings from some heads of cauliflower, leaves, bits of stem. So besides that, I'm also going to be applying a good bit of moisture, I believe. So I was just curious, man. I haven't been able to touch this system for weeks and weeks. It was pretty much hands-off while the time lapse was running. I was always very curious to see what they've accomplished so far. It is interesting how this is kind of a hollowed out dome almost. So it almost seems like they would have had a hard time reaching this, since it was somewhat elevated above the base of the material. And it seems like perhaps just the outer edge was all they were able to nibble away at recently, at least. You can see they've been working down the rind of this melon, gradually picking it apart, and they really didn't leave a whole lot, considering this was an entire cantaloupe melon, a pretty good sized one for that matter. And even the residual moisture that remains in this is minimal. A lot of times when you see mold, one of the first things that the mold is going for is the moisture. Sucks it right up. And this thing, wow, look at that. This thing was polished off within the first week, I think. In here, they really managed to nibble away every little bit of melon off the rind. And it was so dry already, I guess they couldn't really make much of it at that point. So that's what's left of what they've had for the past 6.5 weeks. And I was really starting to grow a little bit concerned about the dryness in here. I was really noticing how the worms were kind of huddling under here and causing this whole thing to get submerged, making me worry that perhaps out on the edges the amount of moisture in the system might be lacking. My guess is that we're going to find worms only very, very low, because the top layer of material is extremely dry. And it's probably not too surprising that we're finding lots of worms that are a little bit skinny, perhaps a little bit dehydrated due to the lack of moisture that's been applied to this system, or the absence of moisture that's not been added to the system lately. So we got a whole bunch of top covering leafy material here. awfully dry stuff. So perhaps one thing we can do is douse it heavily with water and make it into the foundation for the feeding, and turn it from being entirely neglected and left to dry and change it around to completely moist. Here we're just seeing some leftover foods from some of the feedings that this system got prior to the time-lapse video. This was like a bit of corn cob here. And you know, considering that these two systems are buddy bins and they're only about a week apart, this is only about a week younger, no, 2 weeks younger than the other system. That other system's already received 15 feedings in its lifetime, while this system, including the cantaloupe, has received only 9. So we're quite a few feedings behind here. Done intentionally with the, intention of leaving this whole system undisturbed, so that the only thing that changes is what the worms managed to do to the food they were given. It does seem like the place to find the worms in this system is down low, very low, which is where there still is a little bit of moisture for them. But even down there, it feels like not a whole lot. I think they're going to appreciate getting a nice, thorough shower today. So let's keep excavating this middle section, which is where the melon had been placed. Yeah, see all the worms, very, very tiny and skinny. Very, very tiny and skinny. Poor little guys are dehydrated, and they're all kind of huddling together, which is what worms will do when they're a little bit distressed. But there's certainly no absence of worms, you got to admit that. Lots and lots of worms living in this box. So I'm looking forward to giving them a whole bunch of melon, not melon, they've had melon for weeks now. They're going to get a whole bunch of pumpkin and cantaloupe. Oh man, I keep going back to cantaloupe melon. Cauliflower. Pumpkin and cauliflower. That's what they're getting today. Plus a few pieces of moldy bread. Alright, so we can examine the other edge of the bin, but I think as long as we're here in the middle, which is where I'd like to apply the feeding today, thinking we can start piling in some of that reclaimed top covering leafy material that we salvaged. Even though it's extremely dry, we're going to dampen it right away. Try to start recovering from all this drying that this system has been experiencing. So I'm going to bring in my water, and I'm not going to be skimpy on the water. I'm just going to go crazy here. Pretty much dousing it. And the foods that they're getting, all that pumpkin is going to definitely kick off a lot of moisture as it thaws. So that's kind of cool. And then at the end, I'm going to be covering up with some bubble wrap just to make sure whatever moisture is in the system stays. I did pump up this water bottle right before I started applying moisture here, and it's dispensing it at quite a rate. So it might be a bit much, but I don't think that's going to be a problem, and I don't think the worms are going to mind. I just figured let's take a quick look over on this edge too, before we dump in the food today. I like the idea of sort of mixing it all together. It is kind of nice to see that the worms are able to hang out even on these outskirts of the system. Granted, they've only been able to stay in the very low bottom reaches of the system due to the absence of moisture, but now hopefully we're going to be able to restore conditions to the point where they can roam freely throughout the entire contents of the bin. I'm almost wondering if we should just sort of start combining some of that heavily dampened material in the middle. No, I think that's all leafy stuff that we had hoped to use as the bedding foundation, or the, kind of leafy foundation for the feeding. So let's kind of re-excavate, get back down to that stuff that we just moistened, back to that semi-dry leafy material. That's what we're looking for. I think we've created a large enough hole here that we can pile in a pretty generous portion of food, but before we do, I'm just feeling this urge to give them even more dampness. I think once we put the plastic on and the moisture in this bin starts to recirculate, it's going to help hydrate everything back to normal conditions again. Perhaps even before we cover up, we can go ahead and sort of douse the top surface of the material too. All right, let's start piling in the food we're going to give them. I did use a knife to chip apart this pumpkin, which has been sitting around for almost a year. We're only a week or so away from Halloween, and this pumpkin actually dates back to last year's Halloween. So let's see, we've also got some moldy bread. We're going to put that in here. I guess we'll try to share, and we're going to save a few bits of all these different types of food for the other bin. But like I said, that other bin was just fed 6 days ago. So I don't think the need for food is quite as dire over there as it probably is here. So let's start introducing some of this cauliflower as well. I think all of this stuff is going to dump out a good bit of moisture too as it thaws. This stuff probably wouldn't do so if it was put in here, you know, freshly cut or freshly processed for cooking. But by freezing it first, I believe just the freezing and thawing process itself is going to cause a lot of the moisture in this stuff to just come flying out right into the bin, which is exactly what we're hoping for here. So I've also got a couple coffee filters over here. There's 2 left, so why don't we save one of them as a replacement feeding zone indicator. This one could just go in here as surplus bedding. Okay, and then I think as a finishing touch, we can just give this whole top surface a nice coating of water. It also seems like we've done a pretty decent job sort of blending everything together here to equalize stuff. And we've also focused all the really damp stuff right down into the middle and drenched it. So I think the worms are really going to appreciate the treatment that we're giving this bin here. So as long as we're going to go generous on applying moisture, we're going to just use that also as an opportunity to rinse off my glove, rinse off the sides of the bin. And just do a little bit of housekeeping here, tidies things up as long as we're at it. And pile in a little bit more water. Quite a bit more water. I guess I don't want to go overboard here. I'm just looking at all these worms, how skinny they all look, and usually that's kind of the first sign of worms being a little bit dehydrated is, you know, them getting really skinny. I guess utilizing whatever moisture they've got left in their bodies to get by, but hopefully this will help get them all chubbied up again a little bit, at least a little bit. I don't know how much it's really going to help. So that was some worm chow that I sprinkled on, and I don't even know how much it's going to be needed, but as long as we're sprinkling stuff here, the other thing we can sprinkle on is a little bit of this grit here too. I'm just putting it out here on the top. If they need it, they can grab at it just in case it is needed. And then I think we could begin covering stuff up here. So I've got the got this nice piece of bubble wrap that I fashioned for this system. It's brand new, never been used in a worm bin yet. You can see some of these bubbles have quite a big hole in them. They must have been cut open with a razor knife as somebody was trying to get into whatever it is that was protecting. And that's all good. And here we're just going to put on a little bit of cardboard so that what's right underneath it is nice and dark, so that the worms feel comfortable coming up and hanging out even up on the top surface. So that's it for getting our original worms fed, back into service, ending their special mission, and let's go get their buddy bin. Get them fed too really quick. Here we go. So here too, I had just recently gotten back into trying to put on shade coverings, and I'm not sure how much it's helping. I guess if we see worms hanging out here in the relative darkness, then we'll know it's kind of working. it is kind of nice to be able to give them a little bit of darkness, since that is what the worms generally prefer. And it's just the position of the table that the bins all rest on. It just happens to be in a spot where the late day sun shines right in on the bins. And I can imagine that at those times of day, the worms probably all skedaddle because of the bright light. I figured with the shade, you know, maybe it'll just keep them feeling like they can just remain near the top surface rather than needing to retreat. So like I said, that was feeding number 10 for the other bin. Here I believe this is feeding number 16. So not too surprising that there appears to be a good bit more material here in this bin, since most of my feedings also include a good bit of bedding. In this case there really wasn't any bedding added, and it won't be added here either. It was more about the food and the moisture, I think. Next time we'll probably get back to, you know, including a good bit of bedding. But I just haven't had a chance to replenish my bedding supply lately, so today the bins are just going to have to go without. Oh, that reminds me, I've got a feeding zone indicator. I'm going to have to go visit that other bin. Apply the feeding zone indicator to where they last got fed. So we'll be sure to preserve that last coffee filter in there for that purpose, and I'll return to the original worms to get them set up with their feeding zone indicator. And the moisture level in here is really nice. Pretty much perfect. Everything's got a nice dampness level to it, but nothing feels muddy or sticky. Everything appears to crumble quite readily. Now the stuff that we fed them only 6 days ago was berries, and it makes me wonder if we're going to even see any leftovers of that after only 6 days. I bet you if we do see leftovers, it's going to be minimal. The one thing that we gave them in addition to the berries, though, that I think we are going to see some leftovers of, we're probably just going to see the entire thing, because they've probably not been able to do much with it, if anything, is the orange. We gave them an entire orange, and I did puncture its skin so that, you know, if it is something that they can start to make use of, then they'll be able to just crawl into it. So I am curious to see what kind of progress the orange made. And I guess if we see any little splotches of red, those will be the raspberries, but I sort of doubt that we're going to see any. I'm starting to see the signs of the pumpkin. I mean, the of the, looks like a pumpkin, right? It's the right color, but it's not the right type of food. This is the orange. I'm going to try not to disturb it too much. I could see worms kind of hanging out on it, not put off by being on it, unless, you know, unless they ended up on there with me just sort of stirring stuff around. But I think it would be more interesting just to leave it intact that way and just see what it looks like next time we check in, to see if the worms were able to get into it on their own without me helping breach the fruit. And I guess we're probably going to bump into other things such as leftover corn cobs like this. Making decent progress, it seems. Ooh. Good number of worms hanging out down there where the last feeding was applied. Not bad. So let's go ahead and open up a pit in the middle here where we could dump in today's feeding for them. What else do we have down here? Here we must have had some paper towels or napkins or whatever placed in here as sort of the foundation for the feeding. Yeah, I guess in the other bin we did sort of have a bunch of recycled leafy matter off the top surface that we were able to utilize as sort of a bedding material to lay down as the foundation for that feeding. Here I think we'll be fine without. I think by the next time we visit in on this system, by then I should already have a fresh batch of bedding mixed up to include with their feeding, but this time they're just going to get some food. And the stuff's frozen, so that's my only concern, is dropping it right on here and having the little wormies have it to come in contact with the frozen food they're going to be given. Maybe we'll just open up a nice hole here and then give the worms a moment to retreat down into the material out of harm's way so that I could plop in the food and my conscience can be clear, and then we'll be done here. I tell you, I couldn't have been away for more than maybe a minute and a half. And it's amazing how the worms just managed to squirm out of view so quickly. I just went over to the other bin to put in the feeding zone indicator really quick. So that's where the other filter went, but we're going to take this filter and, oops, I just put a big tear into it. We're going to use this one as the feeding zone indicator here, but now I feel like we can simply place in the food that they're getting and not worry about it landing right on top of any unsuspecting worms. So here too, a couple chunks of this moldy bread. I forget where the mold was, but it was looking pretty nasty, so I wasn't going to eat it, but I figured the worms might like it. And then a few chunks of cauliflower, a few chunks of pumpkin, and I think the worms are going to enjoy that. They certainly had no leftovers remaining of the berries they got, but there was obviously a whole bunch of leftover orange that they've yet to work on here. So let's put that right here in the middle, so that it'll be right in the line of fire once the worm traffic starts to flood in to get access to all that yummy stuff they just got. And then I don't think we're gonna, I don't think we're gonna see a whole lot of leftovers of this feeding, although the orange might still be intact when we return here next time. Sometimes I wonder about these citrus fruits. I did try lime in a couple of my other systems, and it did seem like after almost 2 weeks of coming back to the system, I still saw what appeared to be almost whole intact limes untouched. Now whether the orange is more acidic as far as citric acid than the limes or vice versa, I don't know, but I'm assuming that they're probably comparable. So chances are we're probably going to come in here next time and not see a whole lot of movement on that orange, but it's still interesting to watch to see how it progresses in the worm bin. Alright, that was fun. And I'm kind of disappointed that the time lapse had to end kind of abruptly, and I guess I shouldn't be so distraught, because if you look at that piece of cantaloupe, the shape that it was in, it really didn't look like the worms would be able to make a whole lot of that anyway. So it might be perfect timing for it to have ended this way and in this, particular point in time, because that thing probably would have just sat there anyway, going nowhere, and the poor worms would have just continued to get dry and hungry, and now I've got a feeling that they're all quite happy and content with what we just gave them. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. At some point soon I'll be able to put the time lapse together of that cantaloupe getting consumed, and I might even be able to produce a little sneak preview of that, which will just consist of some snapshots I took every couple days over the 45 or so days that the system was in progress. So that might be a nice little in-between thing to whet everyone's appetite in preparation for the actual time-lapse coming out. Alright everyone, I've got a few things I've got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away over here, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That stuff's all boring, but before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.